Here on WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160. He is State Senator Joe Pittman. You can join us on Facebook Live this morning as well as just listening with us here on WCCS. Senator Pittman brought to us this morning by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Good morning.
Todd, good morning.
It's good to have you back with us here today. How big was the sigh of relief to escape Harrisburg for at least a little bit after the budget was announced on Friday?
Well, it certainly came together well, given all of the acrimony that we've had over the last 2 years. I think that everybody in Harrisburg realized that the last thing the people of the Commonwealth needed was an uncertainty as it relates to not having a budget done on time and balanced. Wasn't a perfect product. You know, there are 253 legislators. If we all got to write our own budget, they'd be 253 different budgets. Yeah. So there's certainly give and take. There are things I'm not happy with. There's things I'm very happy with. And on balance, we have predictability, and I think we've done a very good job for the taxpayers and keeping it balanced and also putting in a healthy reserve for a future rainy day.
Right off the bat, people will start talking about education funding. That always seems to be a really big ticket item when it comes to the budget. And there were increases for Indiana County school districts and all throughout the 41st district, just as there were increases for most schools across Pennsylvania. The Homer Center funding formula is certainly something that you have had on your plate for a while, and that still needs to be fixed, doesn't it?
It's a challenge, and it's been a multi-decade challenge. But what you see in the numbers, and as we have talked to Superintendent Whitesell and Jody Rainey, the principal, we had the conversation as well. If you look at how we're moving the numbers, we're focusing less on what was called hold harmless, where you didn't take into account enrollment shifts, to where now enrollment shifts are being taken into account. And you saw Homer Center in particular got a 3% increase in their basic education funding subsidy. Indiana actually got the largest percentage at 4.4, but the rest of the districts in the county were much lower. That's been a trend that's been occurring over the last few years as it relates to Homer Center. It still doesn't bring them into balance in terms of the per pupil allocation that they view the fairness on, but it is a step in the right direction. Ultimately, when you have 500 school districts in this Commonwealth, everybody's definition of fair is different, and that's the problem. We used to, and when I say we, back in the mid-90s, we used to take into account student enrollment. Student enrollment was a factor. Well, as you know, all of our school districts are declining in enrollment. If you look at the historical numbers, the Homer Center School District's enrollment has declined at a much slower pace than the districts around it. And so when you look at a per pupil number, it throws it out of whack, because as districts' enrollments decline, their subsidies continue to go up, and the per pupil investment in those students from the state becomes much higher, much more quickly. And that's the biggest hurdle we have, particularly with Homer Center.
People will talk about property taxes and how they are such an intricate part of the school funding formula. And there have been efforts, and maybe over the last year or so, we haven't talked about property tax reform as much because there have been so many other issues that have sort of pushed it aside. But it's always there, isn't it?
It is always there. And you're right, the pandemic pushed a lot of things aside. But it is a topic that is coming back up again. It's a topic that I fundamentally believe we need to address. I do believe that your home is your castle. I don't think that's a cliche. I think that's truth. And when you pay a property tax, you're basically renting off the government. We get back to that question of how do you replace it and how far do you go with any potential shifts of the property tax. So that issue remains. It's always out there. Right now in this current political environment, I don't see a governor who is interested in pursuing that type of reform. And candidly, I'm not sure there are 26 votes in the state Senate for that type of reform right now. One thing that the pandemic showed us is that when we have deep recessions, we quickly lose our revenue streams through income and sales tax. And so when we talk about using those as sources of replacement, that makes people pretty nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that has been worked on for quite some time, and it doesn't look like there's a solution coming there anytime soon. Some of the other big issues that have been discussed over this first 6 months of the year in Harrisburg, right now, as a matter of fact, as we are speaking, the Board of Governors of the State System of Higher Education is meeting, and they're getting an update on the state system redesign, the consolidation of 3 universities in the West and 3 more universities into the in the East that are going to turn 6 universities basically into 2, and the public comments that have been going on there. The state system funding is all a big part of this as well. State system has really jumped up to the top of a lot of agendas for a lot of lawmakers, hasn't it?
It has, and we put in a $50 million allocation for their redesign efforts. Our plan is to give them that allocation of $50 million a year for 4 years to help with the overall redesign of the system in the 14 schools. When you look at the basic facts, we are educating approximately 90,000 students within the 14 school system. That's down from 120,000 at its peak. When you take off the unacceptable alternatives, such as just closing an entire university or closing an entire campus, you then have to look at the 15 schools and how you can right-size them and make them more efficient. And my biggest frustration is I believe IUP has paid a terrible price over the last couple years because they have done what they need to do to right-size, but I'm not seeing that throughout the system. And my hope is that the integration that's occurring in these other schools will cause that kind of decision-making to happen, because candidly, if it doesn't happen within the other schools, it's going to be a further drag on IUP.
And we hear from different sources, including the state system chancellor himself, that something much more drastic could happen within almost as little as a year's time if this thing isn't turned around that quickly. So that's another issue that is not going to go away anytime soon. There's a lot of words to be pushed around there on that one. We have been, in the first 6 months of this year, continuing the conversation on RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Where it stands right now, and with it looks like a looming visit to the courts to maybe get some resolve on this, that's another issue that has a very, very direct impact right here in Indiana County.
Yeah, it's been the 2-year conversation essentially, and the governor, we had a 2/3 vote in the Senate for my legislation, and which is also sponsored by Representative Struzzi in the House, that simply says if we're going to do this, we're going to have the General Assembly support going into it. And we had 35 votes. We had all 29 Republican senators, and we had 6 Democrat senators join us. So this is a bipartisan issue. It's something that has bipartisan support. But the governor continues to pursue the regulations. My understanding is what's called the Environmental Quality Board will vote, I believe, July 13th on whether or not to approve the final regulation, and then it will go through the process to what's called the Independent Regulatory Review Commission, and it's continuing its march. So we're going to continue to pursue efforts. We do have a role in the regulatory process. I assume we'll exercise that. But I do believe this will go into the courts ultimately.
Well, we're with Senator Joe Pittman this morning here on Indiana in the Morning. A few more moments left with him. So, all right, the spring session is over. The summer is here. You get a chance to get more about the district and find out from folks what's on their minds, and then maybe craft a plan for the fall. What are some of the things that you're looking at over the next couple of weeks and months?
Well, I was actually in Blairsville this morning. I had breakfast at the Underground Railroad Museum in Blairsville, which is a very neat development in our community. I wasn't very familiar with it or very aware of it, but we took a tour of it. I think it has some pretty interesting artifacts, and is something that I personally enjoyed doing this morning, being the history buff that I am. On the way back into Indiana, I was listening to your conversation about the air show. I think that is a great sign of a return to normalcy, and as
Yeah.
we see the fairs developing, I need to have a conversation with our commissioners. It's been a while since I've been in Harrisburg to talk about what our priorities are going forward. As you know, we've made some great progress on the broadband front. That's been a big priority, and I'm eager to talk to them about how to continue that. And I want to work with Indiana Regional Medical Center. I want to work with IUP. Both entities are looking at some new developments and some ways to reinvent themselves. And I think that those efforts are things we need to support because they certainly are a big core in our community and they deserve our assistance wherever possible.
The COVID-19 pandemic is something that's going to hang on for a while. Even after we have gotten to the other side of it, there are still going to be ramifications that have to be dealt with. While we're thinking on the medical terms of people getting that vaccine and how important that is, dealing with the variants and whatever the next issue coming up medically, from a business standpoint, an economic recovery standpoint, there's a lot to do and a lot of different people who could use our help. We had somebody in yesterday talking about how now as people are getting out there, we've gotten into the habit, or some have, of, it's easy, it's convenient to do things online, but there are local people who have really put their lives and their careers on the line, their families, and the support of local business people becomes even more important now.
Our local business community has been through hell. There's no other way to describe it. They need and deserve our support. They were very patient during times of great uncertainty and the great unknowns in terms of what the shutdowns meant, how to comply with them, how to deal with them, and that is all behind us. Yes, COVID-19 will be part of our society probably forever, but we've had that before. We've dealt with it before, similar to the flu. And we just have to move forward. We have to accept it. We have to be vigilant of it. But we have to continue the return to normalcy. And a big part of that is remembering that our local business community was here throughout those very difficult 15 months, and they certainly deserve our support.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Senator Joe Pittman, thanks for visiting with us this morning. We'll catch up again at some point this summer, I'm sure.
My pleasure, Todd. I'm around.
Have a great one.
All right, you too.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160, 25 minutes after 9 o'clock, and the CBS Sports Minute next, brought to you by